Hey guys, so today I'm reading a book series known as Harry Potter. So obviously we have to start with the first one, otherwise the series just won't make sense. Like and comment down below if you want me to continue the series. So without wasting your time much more, let's get on into the book. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you would expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grungans, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Miss Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came very useful as she spent so much time craning over the garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursley had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion he was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursley had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Miss Dursley's sister, but they had met for several years. In fact, Miss Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister for several years, because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursley-ish as it was as possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think that the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived on the street. But the Dursleys knew the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on a tall gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Miss Dursley gossiped away happily as she rustled screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large 20 owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked his briefcase out and pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek. And he tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. Little tyke, retorted Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4 Privet Drive. He was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen at all. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat sitting on the corner of Privet Drive. But there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No. Looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove toward town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills. He was hoping to get that very day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. But on the edge, as he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help but noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about, people in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed funny in clothes. The get-ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was in range to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had been older than he was, wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him, but then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunin's parking lot, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on the drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight. The people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed open-mouthed as an owl after owl speeded overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl, even at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people, he made several important telephone calls, and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs, and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the bakery. He had forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's.
What are you doing, like in the video?
Yeah. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy.
There's Lunchables in the refrigerator.
Okay. This bunch were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. He was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag. That he caught a few words of what they were saying. The Potters. That's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them, but he thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at his sensor not to disturb him, seized the telephone, and had almost finished dialing his phone number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down, stroked his mustache, thinking no, he was being stupid. The Potters wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He had never seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There is no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her if he'd had a sister or brother like that. But all the same, those people in clothes. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on the drills that afternoon. And when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny old man scrambled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile and in a squeaky voice that made the passerby stare.
Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating. This is a happy, happy day.
And then the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a muggle. Whatever it was, he rattled. He hurried to his car, then set off for home, hoping he was imagining all of these things, which he had never hoped before, because he didn't improve imagination at all. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, Privet Drive, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, the tabby cat he'd spotted this morning was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eye. "Shoo!" said Mr. Dursley very loudly. Well, guys, that's all I'm going to be reading to you today. And there's a lot of pages in this book, and we only got by not a lot. So please, 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 I love doing these things. Comment down below for me to do them again. See you next time. Bye.